Great. Thank you so much, Megan. Really, really appreciate it. We're very excited to lead this panel discussion today. We don't have really, we're not going to start with any slides. We will close some slides. But when we first started talking about giving this talk, I thought it'd be really useful since I've done a business development training. Sharla I've known for years, and as she's recently published a book on business development. And Abra, who I've just got recently to know, has the in-house counsel perspective. So we thought instead of having, literally you have three talking heads, but instead of just having three talking heads talking at you, we want to talk with you today about business development. And we're going to do it in a Q&A session with regard to that. If there's specific questions that you have during the presentation, please put them in the chat box and we'll try to get through them if time allows. So the way I'm going to get started with this is, Megan's given us a great overview in terms of who we are individually, at least in terms of what our resumes say or our bios online. But I want to talk a little bit about, get a little bit short background from Sharla and from Abra in terms of your career background and the impact that business development has had on that. So Abra, I'm going to start with you and put you on the spot first.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abra Cooper, and I am corporate counsel at Daimler Trucks North America. I focus my practice generally on commercial and trademark matters, and I'd say I probably spend like 60 to 70% of my day supporting our various purchasing functions through all stages of contracting, including dispute resolution and litigation. In terms of where I got my start, I was in private practice in Portland for about 4 years, focusing on IP and commercial litigation, and I probably about 3 years in realized that I didn't want to focus solely on litigation and started thinking about how I might pivot and kind of rebrand myself to make myself more appealing to in-house legal departments. And after about 4 years in private practice, I landed my first in-house position. And since then, I've worked in 4 different in-house legal departments, all in the Portland area. I've been in a legal department of 2 people, and then my current position we're almost at 25 attorneys. So very, different sizes. My roles have been different in each, always with a focus on commercial matters, but with a number of other different responsibilities, just as business needs dictate. I'm very interested in always wanting to diversify my practice, always wanting to learn something new. So that's been really fun for me to, be in these different in-house positions, have these different responsibilities. And it's been fun for me too, because all of the different in-house positions I've had have been in different industries, everything from early childhood education to aerospace. So I've had a lot of opportunities to just really, get to expand what I do, who I know, and it's been fun.
Great. Sharla, I'm going to pitch it to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's always good to come right after lunch because people are sort of amped up and ready to go. I started my practice as a young associate at Fulbright, so the biggest of the big, and then I went to a small litigation boutique and was there for about 4 years before joining a friend of mine at another small firm from which we then spun off and had our own firm for the better part of 20 years. I was the managing partner for much of that time, and I was also in charge of much of the business development side. Even though we were Houston based, we always had a national business practice. And so we did trials all over the country. We represented Fortune 50 and 25 companies. And in the course of that, I learned the importance of developing your own business, having your business, and being able to nurture that through time. About 7 years ago, I guess it'd be 8 years ago now, we joined a very large firm. We went to Wilson Elzer, and then I spent some time at Tucker Ellis, which was a regional firm. And so I have been everything from really small firm to really big firm, and all the roles from significant to insignificant. And so I think I have a pretty good understanding of why it's important for each of you to have a process for developing business. And the name of the book that I wrote is Power at the Table. And my thesis in that is that it's great to be at the table, but if you don't bring business to the table as a lawyer these days, you don't really have any power at that table. And I think if we've learned anything from the pandemic over the last 18 months, it's the importance of being able to control your own destiny and be more in control of your work life. So we hope that we'll be able to help each of you to make that work for you as we move forward.
Great, thank you. And from my perspective, I'm actually coming to you from my alma mater, SMU in Dallas, where I went to school. I've got a PhD in engineering. I started with the failure analysis, which was the largest forensic engineering company in the world, and was quickly thrust into doing business development when my job changed after a few years, and they told me I was going to run the marketing department. So I was kind of thrown into that one. I spent 31 years with Exponent in many different capacities. And then I took a sabbatical, if you want to call it that. I didn't think it was a sabbatical, but it ended up being a sabbatical for about 18 months. And I ran the Product Liability Advisory Council, which is one of the sister associations to the Defense Bar. So that's my background. I got into doing business development coaching and training. And I have a real passion for helping people find their niche. In terms of doing that. So I recently retired from a full-time job and started my own consulting firm here in Dallas. That's what I do. So let me talk about, I'm going to go back. We're going to spend the first probably 10 minutes or so of this presentation just talking about how each of you developed your brand, got into doing business development earlier on in your career. Because I think whether in engineering, like I was in, or law, like the two of you were in, we were trained to be great, I'm going to say technicians in such a way, since I'm an engineer by training, but we weren't trained to be marketers, business development people, to do that. And so how did you embrace this kind of scary subject, because a lot of people think it's very scary, in terms of doing business development early in your career? So Sharla, we'll start with you.
Okay. While I was at Fulbright and one of a whole herd of baby lawyers that were trying to find our way and figure out where the pencils were, I had a fabulous female client who sat me down and said, look, here's the deal. You need to have work of your own, and I'm going to send you some work. And she sent me 2 very small litigation cases. And from that, I gained a good understanding of the concept that I needed to learn how to develop business. I was an English and speech major, so business development and the financial side of things did not come naturally to me. It was something I had to learn. And I was fortunate to have a number of mentors who were willing to talk with me and explain to me how best to do the networking side, which is really sort of the first step, making sure you know people, that you follow up with people, and that you provide them something that's of value as you're doing follow-up. So I was fortunate that I had both that early encouragement from an outside influence, and I had some training internally on just sort of the nuts and bolts of how to go about meeting people, providing them some value, and then asking if they'd be willing to send me some work later.
Great. Abra, how about you?
So when I started out at my firm, we were encouraged to, engage in business development activities and marketing activities. We had non-billable hours that we could use to do those activities. And I, did what we was suggested that we do. I joined local bar committees. I, found boards that had missions that I aligned with and got involved with those groups. I was born and raised in Portland and had gone to college in the Northwest and University of Oregon for law school. So I had a good network in Portland when I came back after law school, and I was pretty deliberate in, reaching out to folks that I knew, following up with them, having coffee with them, getting drinks with them, recognizing that in the future they could potentially be people who would send me work. I will say that I don't think I did any of this very strategically. These were things that, were suggested I do, and they definitely made sense, but I wasn't necessarily thinking long-term about what my goals were in terms of business development. And I felt like in some ways my efforts were you know, kind of all over the place. I was doing all these things. I was trying to get my name out there. I was meeting people. I was getting involved, but I didn't really step back and think about, well, what's my end goal here? So, you know, and in thinking back now, it's, you know, having kind of the mentorship that Sharla mentioned, and maybe being a little bit more assertive in talking to partners at my firm or more senior associates and trying to get an idea of how they did it and what I really should be doing and what I should narrow my focus on, I think would have been beneficial to me. So, you know, I'll say I sort of embraced business development. I went through the steps, but I wasn't really sure where I was going with it.
And I agree, that's the tough thing. And that's, I think what Sharla brought up earlier was the process. It's such a process that you've got to be strategic about. I as well, when I was thrust into doing full-time business development, I was kind of all over the map in terms of I try this, I try that. And I didn't really stop to think about what the implications were and where I should be spending my time. You know, going to a lot of events or doing this, after a while, you finally realize what works and what doesn't, and what events are valuable and what isn't, and the return on investment, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later with regard to it. And so I think that's very important. One thing I'm gonna pivot a little bit because I have a list of questions, but there's something that Sharla said, and I know this in my career in terms of engineering consulting, and I know this for a fact talking to lawyers with regard to it, is how do you find a mentor? Because Sharla, you got lucky, I'm gonna say in some ways, you had a client who stepped in very early in your career to mentor you and help you get a piece of advice. Abra, you went and sought out, I'm gonna say, a mentor. But for people on the phone here, and I think this is critical even for new lawyers or people that are struggling with business development in this kind of environment where it's all virtual, is how do you go about finding a mentor when it's really tough and you need to be able to see somebody who's been successful at doing this part of the job? What do you?
I'll take that first. That's a tough question, and it's always hard to find a mentor, whether you're talking about business development or some other aspect of your professional career. But you need someone that you feel comfortable with and that you really know well enough to be able to ask stupid questions. Because I really was fortunate. The woman that sent me the work was an early in-house female, and I had done some minimal work on some cases for her, and she thought that I had promise, so she was willing to sit down and talk with me. I don't think I would have ever reached out to her on my own. I was too young and I wasn't familiar enough with her. I was much more comfortable with asking people who were closer to my age and my experience level, and some of them were actually very helpful. There were a couple of them who were just natural business development and marketing people. So I think it's important to sit down and think about who you know, who you feel comfortable with. And as Angela said, you're looking for somebody who's good at it already. So evaluate those people who have business and have networks, and ask one of them if they'd be willing to sit down and talk with you about it. But again, part of the issue is you have to be willing to ask. Just like you have to be willing to ask for business, you also have to be willing to ask for help. And not everyone you ask will agree. So and it may have nothing to do with you. They don't have time, they have too many other commitments. You may have to reach out to more than one person, but you should try to identify those people that inspire you in terms of what it is they're doing, and ask if they'd be willing to give you some time and suggestions. Most people will. Occasionally they won't, but most people will.
Abra, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Sharla says. And I think back to those, you know, mentors I've had throughout my career. You know, most of those relationships have sort of grown organically. I don't know that I don't know that I necessarily for any of them sent an email and said, hey, I'm, you know, admire the way you do this and this. I'd like to pick your brain. Let's go out for coffee. Instead, they were, you know, people I worked with or already had relationships with. And I just started spending more and more time from them and, you know, learning from them, asking them all those stupid questions that I didn't want to ask anybody. But, also to echo Sharla's point, even though none of my mentors, I haven't, begun the relationship through just sending an email to somebody I don't know very well, just an acquaintance. I do think whenever I've received emails of that variety, I'm always game to meet somebody for a cup of coffee or a quick discussion and, see who they are, see, what they're hoping to gain, have a discussion with them. And I do think most people, again, some people might not have the time or the energy to be able to do that. But, like Sharla said, I think most people will. But yeah, it might take a while to, take a little bit of reaching out, take some time to find that relationship and find that person who's willing to mentor you and is the right mentor for you. Somebody who, whose values align with yours, who the way they've gone about building their career is something that you want to model, the way you want to model your career after. It takes time.
And to echo what you both say, in terms of where I ended up, my first 2 years at my company were frankly hell. I had no support network. My supervisor was very much concerned about his billability and not mine. And so I had no real support, and I was floundering very fast. And I was at the point where I figured I was either going to be let go or I was going to have to find something else to do. And so when a job happened to open up with the president of the company as his assistant, and nobody really wanted to work with him because he was very difficult to work for, but he was the biggest rainmaker in the firm. And so I applied for this job. Everybody told me I was crazy. And I said, well, if I can't work for the quote unquote best engineer in this company, then I don't belong here. And I figured I was young enough and had enough opportunity that I failed. I at least tried it and failed. At least I tried. So I took the initiative to do that. He became my mentor, and he was the one who put me into the job of doing business development full time. So it can be done, but you've got to actively look for it as part of your being a role model for both your technical and becoming a better lawyer, as well as being a better business development person. I'm going to fast forward a little bit in terms of, let's talk about the last 5 years. Sharla and I have very, very long careers. Abra's a lot younger than us. But, we've seen a lot over our careers, but really in the past 5 to 8 years, there's been some significant changes. We've got a very, very strong emphasis on diversity and inclusiveness in the law and just in general in business. Things have changed in terms of the financial sector. And so I want to talk about challenges in the business development sector that we've seen in the last 5 to 8 years that we didn't see before. For those of us older time business rainmakers, business development people, and what we've seen and what's changing, whether it's virtually or in person. So Sharla, this was one you and I started talking about, so I'm gonna have you lead this one.
Okay. One of the biggest changes that I've seen in recent history is really the push towards designated counsel and counsel panels, so that there is a sort of a limited set of lawyers and materials and opportunities. And I think that is definitely a push from corporate America that is likely to continue. So in making some of your decisions about where you're going to put your time on business development, it's very important to get an understanding of what it is that the client, the potential client, is doing with its legal spend. Do they have a preferred provider program in essence? Do they have a limited group to whom they go? Do they give preference if you're female or if you're African American or you're Latino, or what really is the important issue to them? And I think that has been sort of a game changer over the last decade or so. I see more of an intentional movement towards choosing counsel who can fit within some of those categories. And it presupposes that those counsel are really good at what they do. So for some of you who are very young lawyers, one of the best business development things you can do is to become very proficient at what you do. And then from that, start to build on those things that are sort of your natural strengths. But that has become a challenge. Something else that has changed rather significantly from the time I first started doing business development is that particularly corporate clients have very strict limits on things that you can do for the individual in-house lawyers. So you can't buy them something at Christmas, and you can't take them out for a really fancy dinner and things like that. And in some ways, the pandemic and virtual issues probably benefit you in that, because you no longer have to feel the compulsion to take someone to the $400 or $500 dinner. That's just not going to happen. May happen again in the future, but it's certainly not in this environment and hasn't been for a while. So it has meant that those people who are good at business development have become those who are thoughtful, strategic, consistent. Those are the people to whom work goes. And you need to identify those groups and programs that appeal to you, fit your area of expertise, and fit within what the client is looking for.
All very good thoughts with regard to it. Even from my perspective, selling to lawyers and outside lawyers and in-house counsel over the past 10 years, the increased emphasis on cost control. Again, I add that to it as well. And just, a better understanding of the business. I think there's another emphasis that I've seen in terms of understanding the client and what the client's objectives are. That I found that you never used to talk about you're the best expert or you're the best engineer or whatever it is. But now it's really about how you're solving the problem. We got away from that for a long time in terms of solving now we're going back to it, right? We're all virtually there. We don't have a lot of time. We're pulled in a gazillion different ways, trying to be parents and siblings and caregivers and all the other things that we're doing in addition to doing our work. That I think is really changed the dynamic in terms of where you can focus on business development. Abra, is there anything you want to add? Because I'm going to ask you a different question.
Just one thing I've been thinking about kind of that I saw, especially pre-pandemic and some of the kind of at the Association of Corporate Counsel, their general conference, and a couple other larger CLEs and conferences I had been to, I think in like 2017, 2018 was this focus on legal operations. And I think this kind of gets at some of what Sharla was mentioning in terms of how things were changing for in-house legal departments. It really, there really started to be more of this focus of thinking of the legal department as a business cost center and wanting that legal department to be run more like some of the other departments in the given business. And, that can be everything from, thinking about budgeting, thinking about ROI on, spend on outside counsel versus what you're going to do in-house, all sorts of different things. But I think bottom line, you just kind of have this reinvention of legal departments and how in-house legal departments and how they're operating. And so I do think that was, at least going into the pandemic, something that just was a hot topic at a lot of kind of corporate counsel conferences, CLEs, functions. And I think that has continued, and it's probably something that's not going away anytime soon.
So taking the 18 months, or even going back even 5 years, but realistically 18 months, and the impact on the pandemic on business and becoming more virtual, what has been let's get a good experience and a bad experience for both of you in terms of your business development efforts, given the fact that we can't, quote unquote, reach out and touch each other like we used to going to a conference. So Abra, what do you think? What's good that works for you in terms of this virtual environment, and what is bad for you?
One thing I've really enjoyed is attending virtual CLEs just like this. I'm still getting to hear attorneys present on topics that are relevant to our business and to what what my needs are and what I'm looking for in terms of outside counsel. In some ways, it's easier for me to attend more of these types of events when they're virtual. I mean, you can block, an hour or two on your calendar and log in from your desk, and all of a sudden there's, you're seeing presentations by 10 different attorneys, and that's been really nice for me. I mean, on the flip side, I was always somebody who, enjoyed having in-person interaction with people, including at CLEs. I'm somebody who, if I have questions, I want to go up and talk to that person, the person who had presented, ask those questions in person. I'm less likely to do that or have a conversation with somebody over a chat function. And it's more convenient to go and have that in-person interaction when you're actually at the conference than to for me to follow up with an email and say, hey, I really liked what you said about this and this and this. Our company is looking for somebody who can handle this kind of matter. It's just harder. It just takes more time. So I'm really missing in-person interactions. Another thing that I'm missing, and I was talking to some colleagues about this, is we used to have outside counsel, especially outside counsel based in other parts of the country, who would, come into town, maybe for a matter they're working on for us, but oftentimes just to, maybe they were doing something for another client, and they'd call us up and say, hey, we want to come by the office, swing by the office, say hi to everybody. We'll have, I'll have this partner with me, this associate with me. We just want to, spend some time chatting and see the office, see everybody on the team. I really miss that, because those are the touch points that I think really help sustain the relationships that we have with our outside counsel, and increase opportunities for us to meet other folks on at the firm, on the team, meet those associates who are in a lot of instances actually doing the work product, putting faces to names. So that's been, I feel like, a loss, especially for me.
Sharla, anything to add to that?
Well, one thing I forgot to tell everyone at the beginning of all of this was I retired from active trial practice in June of last year. So the pandemic didn't really affect my trial practice in the way that it did for others, because I was stepping away from that. But what I was stepping into was to do business development training and speaking, and I do some expert witness work and some things like that. So the pandemic has made that in some ways more difficult, because the timing was such, really hard to do good training remotely. You can do some of it, but as Angela knows, if you're going to do really good, sit down and talk to somebody training about what you need to do for business development, you need to be able to look them in the eyes over the table and talk things through. And that's very awkward over this medium, although this is better than a conference call. So that was sort of the bad. The good, on the other hand, is that because everyone has been remote, it hasn't really mattered where people were. So I got the opportunity to do some things I might not have pre-pandemic, because it no longer mattered where I was. So the Abras of the world are willing to reach out to people who have the expertise they're looking for without really thinking anymore about geographically where they may be. And that may continue to be true after the pandemic, it may not. But I went to a live conference last week, and I'm like Abra, I had no idea how much I missed the just in-person connection with people. That's sort of irreplaceable. But on the good side of it, because everyone is remote, it has opened up some opportunities that I think might not have existed previously.
I totally agree. From a training and coaching point of view, it was terrible. It's been terrible, because what happens is you put all this effort into trying to do training, and people turn their screens off and they're doing something else and they're not paying attention to you. So, for my advice is to be really cognizant of that on a virtual, that you're paying attention, because sometimes somebody will just call on you and then you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't been paying attention to her and now she's calling on me. So from whether it's business in a training session or if it's in an actual, business setting or a conference setting, be really careful on that. On the flip side, for me, what I found was people are more willing to pick up the phone, not necessarily a Zoom call, but my business development, my business generation in terms of connecting with people, with networking, having real conversations with people I didn't know increased substantially because people were willing to take the time to learn about you and make a new connection. People are writing prolifically now, and there's so much opportunity for people to write. They're always looking for whether it's in LinkedIn or ABA or DRI or the regional defense councils or whatever it is to present or to write. There's so much opportunity for you to get your brand out there to change. I think that's been, one of the valuable things. It's not as competitive in some ways in terms of getting your word out versus having very minute slices of opportunities. There's much more of a wealth of opportunity to be seen. And I think that's a really good way. That's something I think that came out of it. But you're right. One of the reasons I ended up retiring was that I couldn't imagine another year of not getting out and going into seeing clients in their offices and just, sitting down, having a cup of coffee and just, being in their presence. And they never can take away from that. And it's really, really important in terms of building your relationships. So Abra, we're going to get to the crux of this because I know lawyers want to hear about how do they get to know you? How do they get your business? And so how do you want to be interacted with? What do you like? What resonates with you? I'm a new lawyer or I'm a longtime lawyer, but we've never met. And I really want to get to know your trademark work and get to know you and get potentially the opportunity to work for you at some point. Give us some advice with regard to that.
Well, I guess for me, when I think about how I wanted to be marketed to and business development generally, for me, it's all about relationships and building those relationships. If somebody is simply, if they, find my name in some directory and they see where I work and they just shoot me an email with nothing else, I'll respond politely, but that's not going to be, I'm not just going to give you work based on that. If something that I see from time to time is attorneys will see that, our company has been sued and they will attach the complaint and send an email and say, hey, we can help. That's great, but we've already got relationships with other attorneys. We're probably already moving forward on the matter. And half the time the complaint will have to do with, employment litigation or something that I have no involvement in. So sending that to me isn't going to do anything. I guess I can't speak for everybody, but, like I mentioned before, I'm almost always willing to sit down with somebody and get coffee if they send me an email and, show an interest in better understanding my role at DTNA, how our legal department functions, want to learn about the business. But I would recommend that you think carefully about how you are, I guess, quote, marketing in some of those initial meetings. I think it's better to really focus on thinking about how you can kind of slowly build up a relationship with me or any of my colleagues, as opposed to just immediately making a pitch before you understand, even what work we might be willing to give you, or, what it is that our company even does, or where we operate, or what we're looking for. One example I always think about is at one company I worked for, we had a national footprint, and most of our litigation took place outside of Oregon. And I did handle a pretty significant amount of litigation matters, but in my time at that company, I never had a case in Oregon. So I was never looking to hire local counsel in Oregon. And so thinking about somebody who might be wanting to pitch business in that sort of situation, and they're not really understanding, where our company is focused, what we do, what I do, it's frankly, I don't want to say it's a waste of your time if you are a litigator trying to pitch me on work in Oregon, because there might be other opportunities for other folks at your firm. And it's always worth building a relationship with somebody, but maybe I'm not the person you should be prioritizing. So I do think my advice is always slow down, build that relationship. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to send an email and, you know, say, I'm really interested in learning more about your practice. Would you, you know, want to meet for a drink, want to meet for coffee? But I think you need to temper your expectations. Don't think that, you know, a meeting or two and a phone call and you're in. That's not realistic.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And I think the other thing is there's got to be some kind of a connection at some point. I mean, we all are overloaded with communication, whether it's email, whether it's blog alerts, whether it's webinar invitations, whatever it might be, we're overloaded. And even I have to always be cautious when I was hiring vendors to be very careful about those relationships, because I didn't want to treat them in a nasty way and have a client treat me in a nasty way, right? But I want to make sure I'm going to respond to people that I've had at least some communication with. Either I've met them in a meeting or we've been on a Zoom discussion. I mean, I was in a Zoom room in an international arbitration, and we ended up in one of these chat room breakout things. And I started talking to this lawyer from Scotland. I'd been to Scotland. And people dropped off, and he and I just started talking about Scotland. And then he asked who I was. And of course, I was the outlier in the room because I was the engineer and a bunch of lawyers. And so we chit-chatted for a while, and then we got off. I followed up with him. And then I followed because he said, oh, you know, we may have this opportunity to do something. And I followed up with him. And then the third time I followed up with him, he's like, I think we're ready to go to talk about it. Tell me what you guys do. But we were building the relationship over the time, and it all happened over Zoom. It all happened over Zoom, and we ended up getting a project out of it. It took months, but it was back and forth, happy Thanksgiving, this, that, and the other things, just trying to, you know, get him to remember who I was. Was the one thing. So you're right, in terms of a meeting is not a relationship, right? It's something that you got to do, and you don't want to also overload somebody with pestering them so much that they're going to stop responding to your voice calls or your emails. So that's,
right. I think, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's worth, you know, you reach out a few times, you maybe have a meeting. I think sometimes it's good to step back too and think about ROI. Like, is it really worth your time to continue to try and market to this person if you're not getting, you know, any positive reception, any feedback? You know, sometimes I think it's good to just stop, reevaluate, and, you know, direct your marketing efforts in another direction if your initial target's not working out.
In the last few minutes, I want to talk about some lessons that we've learned that we know of from our experiences with regard to it, and also tracking. We talked about ROI. And so I want to go into the ROI and what the value of that is in marketing. And, you know, Sharla and I go back a long term, and I've read her book and, you know, learned a lot about her style in terms of her branding, and what she did was she got on the speaking circuit really early on in her career with regard to it. But let's talk, and I want Sharla, I'd like you to lead this in terms of this ROI value for your company in terms of the expenditures that you're making in your time and dollars, in terms of getting out there and trying to get business, as well as tracking it.
Okay, well, first thing, I'm going to shamelessly plug the book, because one of the things that I did when I was writing the book, I told Angela and Abra both this, I wrote the book that I wished I'd had when I was trying to learn how to do business development. So one of the things that I include in there are some worksheets, because I think it's really important. We as lawyers are really good about keeping track of the things we need to keep track of. They're on the calendar. We have case management orders, we have schedules, but if you don't have those sorts of things for your business development task, it's easy to either lose sight of what you were doing or discover that you've forgotten to do something that you meant to follow up on. So it's important to do that. I also suggest, because it worked for me, sit down every 6 months and at the end of every year and go back through all the things that you've done. You've had coffee with Abra 10 times, but she doesn't have any work to send you. You love her, but maybe you have coffee with her once a year instead of once a month, because she's not in a position to send you work and you need to be spending that time talking to someone who can. So you need to understand both the emotional investment and the cost investment. In the virtual world, the dollar costs are smaller because you're not out by having dinner and you're not paying for coffee. On the other hand, your time investment is still very significant. So it's important to keep up with what you're actually doing and what it costs you, both in terms of time and in terms of economic expense. Those things that don't work, if at the end of the year you've done something that just didn't work out, don't do that again next year. Figure out what works for you and what's giving you return on the investment, because that's the time that you're spending. And you could be using that time to do something different. You could be using it to have fun. You could be using it to do billable time on someone else's work and getting work referrals internally, because something that's also important if you're a young lawyer is to remember that your market is not just external clients, it's all of those partners and lawyers around you. You want them to send you work as well, because that will help with your billables, it will help with your work in progress, and it helps with your accounts receivable. And at the end of the analysis, it really is all about the dollars in the door on the business side. So the reason you're looking to develop those clients is not just because it's an intellectual exercise and you're going to have fun doing their work and it's fulfilling. You want all of that to happen, but you also need to evaluate whether it brings dollars in the door. And if it doesn't, find something that does. But I used an Excel spreadsheet, so I kept track. I knew what day I had coffee with Abra and what day I sent the great article from the Wall Street Journal and all of those things, so I could keep track of them, because the marketing materials for those people who actually do academic business and marketing say that it takes 8 legitimate touches to develop a relationship with someone. And that's not 8 emails that you send out. That's 8 significant, useful interactions that, like Angela said, make sure they remember who you are and they're impressed with you and they remember what you do. So you need to keep track and figure out sort of where you are in the flow.
I think that's really important. I mean, what the virtual world has made it is a lot easier for you to be able to clip and send stuff to people, right? And so that's been, been helpful, but it doesn't take away from whether it's in a CRM, and I know a lot of law firms are going to a permanent CRM system to track your information, or doing it in Excel, or doing it on a piece of paper, or doing it in if you use Outlook. I mean, one of the things that I had was, I would put little snippets of information with information on clients, what, who the names of their kids were and what activities they did. And if they, some of the best people that do business development are ones that know on Monday that they could send an email to their friend who went to Wisconsin to say, hey, the Badgers did great or the Badgers sucked, kind of thing. And those kind of intangible things, those touches and those little things that make you make your relationship stronger, and you're treating him as a person and not a checkbook, is the way I always teach business development. And so those are the kinds of things that will differentiate you. So you got to look about your brand and differentiating yourself from others. Last question I'm going to ask, and then we've got a few reminders at the end. If you could go back and give your younger self some advice, or even for some people on the phone that maybe have 20 or 25 years of business development practice, and they're worried about something still, even though they've got all this experience, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell your younger self now, knowing what you know about business development and the practice of law?
Let Abra go first.
There's probably a lot of things I would tell myself, because, like I said, I don't know that I really embraced business development in a way that set me up for success. And maybe that's why I'm in-house now. I don't know. But, I think just being more strategic, because I really think that's what I was missing. I was doing all of the things I was told to do, but I didn't really know why. And, I think it would have been beneficial for me to kind of take a step back and really think about, think about what I wanted my brand to be, think about what I wanted my practice to look like, think about the types of clients I wanted to attract, and, maybe pivot and engage in activities that were better aligned with those end goals. Another thing that I didn't really do as a young attorney, and I just think I didn't really understand as somebody who had never had significant work experience prior to becoming a lawyer, was develop an understanding of, what future clients, what businesses actually, how they ran, how they make decisions, what an in-house legal department looks like, what they do, what their function is within the larger business. I didn't know those things. And so when, it came time to, sit down with clients and be in client meetings, I just felt like I always had a lot of, quote, dumb questions I wanted to ask about how their business ran, what their business's goals were and what their goals were, and what they wanted us to do for them. I just felt like I would have benefited from, going ahead and asking those questions, or as we talked about earlier, finding a mentor at my firm, or even in the broader community to, take some of those questions to and think about how to position myself to, really understand, a certain business's needs or an industry's needs, or, how I could market myself. And then kind of one other thing I was thinking about, and this is, I guess, advice geared, at more senior attorneys or just kind of at firms generally, is, when we think about the relationships we have with our outside counsel, it's not always a relationship with the firm, it's a relationship with an individual attorney, which there's, pros and cons to that. But one thing, I was thinking about is, if that individual attorney is to leave that firm, that really is a time when we as an in-house team potentially start looking for other counsel. If we don't have a relationship with anybody else at the firm, if that attorney hasn't been including their, younger attorneys in meetings with us, if we haven't been introduced to them, I think that's really a missed opportunity for firms to not, introduce us to everybody, especially the younger attorneys who are going to be in that next generation, and who, if it does turn out that our contact at that firm is leaving, if there's another face that we're familiar with, if there's somebody else's work we're familiar with, we're much more likely to, stay with you, as opposed to looking for other counsel. So I think, think about succession planning. That's, I think it's easier, and we didn't really get into this, but, sometimes in my mind, thinking about it, you have a better ROI on spending time retaining the clients you have. I think in some ways that's easier. If you're doing a good job, if you're maintaining those relationships, it's always easier to, keep what you have as opposed to go out and start at ground zero and trying to build up those relationships. So I think, really think about how you're preparing the next generation of attorneys at your firm to sustain the business that you already have.
Sharla, anything to add?
Actually, I would like to pick up on that last point that Abra made. The research indicates that 80% of your work will come from either existing or previous clients, and that has certainly been my experience. So I think it's really important, and I think that thinking back, I spent a lot of time chasing the shiny new penny when perhaps I could have spent more time on maintaining some client relationships. I have been very fortunate in my career that I've had some really good, very long-term clients, but the in-house people at those clients have changed over time. So it's important to continue to focus on maintaining that relationship with the client as opposed to necessarily just with the one lawyer that you have. So I think that's important. I would also have told my younger self I didn't need to join the strategic planning group. Sounded like a really good idea. And there were a lot of cool people there, but I was never going to get any work out of that. So I think it's okay for each of you to do some experimentation, but I would have told my younger self to experiment less and focus more on the fundamentals of what really fit for what I was looking to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, spending $2,000 to put your name on a golf closest to the pin is probably not the best thing to do. So my younger self is continue to build on relationships, but don't forget to try. You need to try, even if you fail. So that's kind of my parting thing, but I've got to share a few things. We're right on time. So I want to make sure that we're cognizant of that, and your time is important. So we've got 10 little reminders that we put together just to remind you of things you're going to do. You'll get a copy of these as well. So hopefully I can do this. Number one, again, it's all about relationships, and be a real person, have real conversations, and listen to the person that you're talking with. Very, very critical to be real about it and have personal rapport. Number two, this is my motto. Sales is like dating. People trust people and hire people who are interested in their values, their issues, and their success. Making the client look good is very, very important. So treat it like that. Treat clients like people and not like checkbooks. Number three, activity. I mean, one thing you may get lucky with one thing and get a client for life, and you never have to do anything else, but that's very few and far between. But you've got to have a high level of activity. You got to get out of your office and meet people, and they have to be valuable to the client. We've spoken the whole 60 minutes about it's the client's value, not your value. It's the client that you need to concentrate on. So activity is key. Staying connected is important. I had a conversation with a client once. He said, who do you have that does X? I told him who the expert was, and he said, that person, I thought he died. I hadn't heard from him in years. And that was mortifying to me, to somebody who was a significant rainmaker. But you need to stay connected with people. And again, don't pitch work, but provide some value and develop the relationship. Number five, give before you get. There's always need to know information, not junk, but need to know information that's valuable to the client. So make sure you're giving things before you expect to receive things from your client. Number six, listen. Always place yourself in the shoes of the other person. I had a list of questions here, but what happened was during the comment period, Sharla mentioned about a mentor. And I'm like, this is really important for us to do this. So we pivoted and I listened to what she said, and I ended up asking a question about mentorship. So focus on their needs and their situation. As you say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for one reason. You need to listen twice as much as you talk. So that's in that one. Again, don't ask, you don't get. Pretty straightforward with regard to that. Always, if that's it. No is just another answer to a question. It may not be hiring you now, it could be later, or it could just be you're not talking to the right person. So it is an answer to a question, and you can take it personally. You really can't. Number 9, follow-up. One of the biggest challenges in my coaching is getting people to realize that the client's time is valuable, but it's not the responsibility for them to follow up with you. It's yours. So the next step is always yours. So always, always do the follow-up. And finally, never be afraid to try and fail. Failure helps you grow and learn as individuals. And, I wrote a blog this summer when I recently retired and started my new coaching career. It's called Learning from Failure, One Person's Business Development Journey, because, even though I've been doing this for years, I failed and tried and been embarrassed and done things miserably wrong, just like other people have. And I want people to learn and understand that it's okay to stick your foot in your mouth. You got to get out of there, get it out of there at some point. We do that. And with that, I just want to thank Abra and Sharla for doing this. I hope you all learned a lot from this presentation. and want to thank the Oregon Defense Council for inviting us to do this. We really, really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I don't know if anybody has any questions, but we're willing to do that. Thank you.